she traveled alone. Not to escape, not to start over, just to attend a wedding. Warriena Wright had booked a 3-day trip from her hometown of Porirua, New Zealand, to Queensland, Australia. It wasn't her first time flying solo. She was independent, comfortable in her own company. And this wasn't a spontaneous adventure. It was a plan, a short vacation, 3 days, 1 wedding, and back home. But what was meant to be a quiet celebration turned into something else entirely. Within 48 hours of her arrival, she would be dead. On the night of August 7th, 2014, Warriena fell from the balcony of a 14th floor apartment in Surfers Paradise, one of the Gold Coast's most iconic and densely populated neighborhoods. The only other person in that apartment was a man she had met just hours earlier on Tinder. To understand how she ended up there and why she never walked out, we need to go back a little further. Warriena Wright was 26. She had been raised in a modest household just north of Wellington, surrounded by rolling hills and a quiet coastline. She wasn't famous. She didn't crave attention. But those who knew her say she left a mark. Not because she was loud, but because she was thoughtful. She cared about people, and she cared deeply about animals. In fact, months before her death, she submitted a written statement to the New Zealand Parliament advocating for stronger penalties in cases of animal cruelty. She believed in kindness. She believed in justice, even the quiet kind. Her life was simple, not boring, just peaceful. She worked, spent time with friends, explored her interests in nature and photography, and rarely took big risks. But she was also curious, open, willing to meet new people, even online, even briefly. She had joined Tinder like many people did at the time, not with serious expectations, just to chat, maybe connect with someone while on her trip. She arrived in Australia in early August. The sun was out, the beaches were crowded. She visited popular attractions, including the Australia Zoo. There's a photo of her holding a python, laughing, relaxed, completely unaware that it would become one of the last images ever taken of her. That photo was taken just 24 hours before she died. The man she met on Tinder was 30-year-old Gable Tostee. At first glance, he didn't seem unusual. He lived alone in a modern apartment in a high-rise building overlooking the water. He had a job in flooring installation, came from a fairly average family, and had an active online presence. On Tinder, his profile gave off the image of someone confident, maybe even charming. They matched, exchanged a few messages, and made a plan to meet that same night. At around 8 p.m, the two met in person. There's no video of the first moments, but surveillance footage would later show them walking side by side, first to a local tavern, then to a nearby bottle shop, where they picked up drinks. They seemed relaxed, laughing, talking. No one watching them that evening could have guessed what would happen just a few hours later. They returned to Gable's apartment at Avalon Tower, a luxury high-rise near the beach. What followed behind those closed doors was never captured on video, but every word, every argument, every shift in mood was recorded. Unbeknownst to Warriena, Gable Tostee had pressed record on his phone. For over 3 hours, his device captured the entire encounter. At first, the audio is unremarkable, clinking glasses, light conversation, soft laughter, the kind of sounds you'd expect from two strangers trying to get comfortable with each other. But as the night wore on, things changed. The tone shifted. You can hear Warriena's voice begin to waver. You can hear the discomfort creep in, not all at once, but slowly, like tension tightening between the words. There are pauses, sharp changes in tone. Her voice grows nervous. His voice grows cold. At one point she pleads, "I want to go home. Just let me go home." Tostee's reply, You're lucky I haven't thrown you off my balcony, you psycho little bitch. The argument escalates. You can hear movement, heavy breathing, doors opening, closing. She tries to leave. He blocks her, tells her she's not going anywhere. He calls her names, accuses her of attacking him. You have no idea how serious this is, he tells her. Then something happens, something violent. Not loud, but definitive. She ends up outside, on the balcony. The audio doesn't capture the moment she climbs or falls, but it captures what comes just before. The fear, the chaos, the sound of her trying to escape, whatever was happening inside that apartment. And then, silence. At 2:20 a.m. she fell. A neighbor on the 12th floor saw her legs hanging. He shouted for her to go back inside, but before anyone could reach her, she was gone. The fall was fatal. No one could have survived it. But perhaps the most disturbing part of this case isn't the fall. It's what happened afterward. Because Gable Tostee didn't scream. He didn't rush downstairs. He didn't call for help. Instead, the audio keeps going. You hear him talking to himself. I think she might have jumped. I don't know. I just chucked her out and locked the door. Then more calmly, well, that's what happens when you mess around. He walks around the apartment. His tone isn't panicked. It's detached, cold. At one point, he opens a beer. 20 minutes later, surveillance footage captures him exiting the building alone. He walks through the streets, scrolling through his phone. No visible distress. He stops at a pizza shop, orders food, waits. Later that night, he contacts a lawyer. He never calls the police. It isn't until authorities arrive at the scene and start investigating the body that Gable Tostee's name even enters the equation. When police finally locate him, they search his phone and find the 3-hour recording. It becomes the most critical piece of evidence in the case. And it's just the beginning of what would become one of the most controversial trials in recent Australian history. The audio recording that Gable Tostee captured that night wasn't just evidence. It was a window into a slow collapse, a conversation turning into chaos, a situation spiraling past the point of control. It begins with harmless sounds. 2 people, laughing, joking, sipping drinks. Their voices are relaxed. There's even a moment when they toast together. She says something light. He responds with a chuckle. For the first 30 minutes, you'd think this was just a casual encounter between 2 strangers trying to enjoy a drink. But somewhere, something changes. Not suddenly, not dramatically, more like a subtle, growing discomfort. Her voice grows less playful. His responses begin to feel sharper, colder, more clipped. Then she tries to leave. It's hard to say what triggered it, whether it was a comment, a movement, a look, but something made Warriena uncomfortable enough to try to exit the situation. She asks to go home. You can hear the hesitation in her voice, the strain, like she's trying to stay calm and failing. He refuses, says she's being paranoid, that she's drunk, that she's ruining the night. Her voice shakes. I want to go home. Just let me go. And then he says it. You're lucky I haven't thrown you off my balcony. There's a pause after that sentence, long enough to feel it. Then the sounds change. Furniture moves. Objects are knocked over. Her breathing becomes quick, uneven. There's panic in the air now. Not yelling, not screaming, just the unmistakable sound of someone trying to find a way out. He tells her she's acting crazy, calls her names, accuses her of hitting him, throwing things. At one point, he says, "You're not going anywhere. You're staying right here." She begs, pleads. The fear in her voice is no longer hidden. And then more movement, a struggle, maybe with the door, maybe with him. He says again, "You have no idea how serious this is." Those are the last words he says before everything falls quiet. The final moments of the recording don't include a scream, not even a gasp. Just a door, opening, then silence. It's what happens next that makes this case even more difficult to process. Because while Warriena was falling 14 floors to her death, Gable Tostee was inside, still recording, still talking. There's no panic in his voice. I think she might have jumped. I don't know. Then, moments later, I just chucked her out and locked the door. Not long after that, you can hear him walk around the apartment. He breathes slowly, opens something, a drink, probably. And then, he says, "Well, that's what happens when you mess around." That phrase would become one of the most heavily scrutinized lines in the entire investigation. Not just because of the words, but because of how he said them. Cold, detached, as if this wasn't real. He doesn't call the police. He doesn't check the balcony. He doesn't open the door. Instead, he leaves the apartment 20 minutes later. The building's security camera shows him walking out, alone. No blood on his clothes. No rush in his step. Just calm. He scrolls through his phone. And then he walks to a local pizza shop. The security footage shows him waiting in line, ordering food, sitting, eating. No calls to emergency services, no calls to friends, not even a text. It would be hours before police would learn his name. At the same time, just outside the apartment building, a resident on the 12th floor had woken up to screaming. He walked out onto his balcony and looked up, and what he saw froze him in place. A woman, barefoot, was hanging off the balcony edge 2 floors above him. Her legs were dangling. She was holding on, struggling. He shouted to her, "You can't climb down like that. Go back inside." But she didn't respond. A second later, she let go. The neighbor watched her fall. Another resident heard the same commotion, loud bangs, footsteps, a woman's voice, then the silence. When they came outside and saw the body on the pavement, they called emergency services immediately. Paramedics arrived, but it was too late. Warriena had suffered massive trauma. The impact was catastrophic. Her death was immediate. The police began canvassing the building, searching for surveillance footage, identifying witnesses, knocking on doors. It didn't take long to find the unit she'd fallen from. Inside, they found alcohol bottles, Warriena's belongings, her shoes, her bag, her phone. No sign of forced entry, no blood, no struggle in the traditional sense. But one thing stood out. Tostee had left. His name was discovered through building records. His identity confirmed through the apartment lease. Officers tried contacting him, with no response. But it didn't take long to locate him. When they did, they searched his phone, and that's when they found the recording. A full 3-hour audio file, clear, untouched, every word, every breath, every sound. It became the foundation of the prosecution's case. But what's most disturbing, what still puzzles both legal experts and the public, is not just what happened, but why. Why record everything? Why not call the police? Why speak so calmly after what just happened? In the coming days, the media would descend on the story. Headlines across Australia and New Zealand would feature Warriena's photo, smiling, holding a python, unaware of the fate that awaited her. And beside it, the name, Gable Tostee. A name that would become synonymous with one of the most unsettling cases in modern Australian crime. And still, the biggest question remained unanswered. Was it murder? Was it an accident? Or was it something in between? By the time the sun rose over Surfers Paradise, the headlines were already in motion. A young woman dead, a fall from a balcony, a stranger from Tinder, and a 3-hour recording. no one could stop talking about. Within days, Queensland police began assembling the timeline. Surveillance footage showed Warriena and Tostee walking together, calm, laughing, carrying drinks. Witnesses confirmed hearing her voice hours later, terrified, screaming, then falling. And then there was the recording. Officers spent hours combing through it, every word, every silence. They noted when her voice changed, when she pleaded, when he made threats, when he talked to himself afterward. They saw no injuries on Tostee, no physical bruises, but they also saw no remorse, no panic, just control. On August 15, 2014, 8 days after the fall, Gable Tostee was arrested and charged with murder. The news broke immediately. The media moved fast. Cameras followed him as he was led into the Surfers Paradise police station. He didn't look like a man who had taken a life. To some, that made it worse. He was transferred to the Southport Magistrates Court, where he appeared before a judge and entered a plea: not guilty. His defense attorney was quick to frame the narrative. Tostee, they said, wasn't a killer. He was the one under attack. According to him, Warriena became violent. She hit him with a telescope, threw objects, screamed, tried to escape. He claimed that he had no choice but to remove her from the apartment, that when he locked her out on the balcony, it was to de-escalate, not to harm. And when she fell, he wasn't even in the same room. The prosecution, however, had another story. They focused on his words, his tone, the calculated way he handled her growing fear, the way he used psychological pressure to dominate the situation, then acted with cold detachment after her death. They said he didn't push her, but he may as well have. Because according to them, he created the fear, the panic, the feeling that she had to escape, no matter the cost. They called it reckless murder, the act of placing someone in such extreme psychological distress that a fatal outcome became inevitable. And they believed the recording proved it. Tostee was denied bail and held in custody. Meanwhile, the public watched from a distance, many unable to decide where they stood. Was he truly a victim of a violent outburst, or was he a predator in disguise, someone who used calmness as a weapon? The case quickly divided public opinion. Some said Warriena overreacted, that alcohol and misunderstanding turned the night into chaos. Others pointed to a pattern, a man who secretly recorded his dates, who showed no shock after a woman fell to her death, who walked to get pizza instead of calling for help. Reporters dug into his past. Online forums surfaced posts under his name, boasting about his Tinder experiences, mocking women, bragging about conquests. He had once described himself as a pickup artist. It didn't take long for the internet to find him. Screenshots, usernames, old blogs. Some of it was tasteless, some of it disturbing, none of it illegal. But in the court of public's opinion, it painted a picture, not of a man out of control, but of a man who liked being in control. Still, control doesn't always mean guilt. When the trial date was finally set, the case had become one of the most closely watched in the country. In the courtroom, Warriena's family sat silently. They had flown in from New Zealand. They weren't there for spectacle, just answers. Her mother refused interviews. Her sister wore black. They listened as the prosecution began presenting the audio in full. For the jury, the experience was haunting. The recording was played in court, segment by segment. They heard Warriena's voice, laughing at first, then afraid, then begging. They heard him mocking her, telling her she was crazy, threatening her. They heard him say, "You're lucky I haven't chucked you off my balcony." And then, the silence. Jurors were visibly uncomfortable. Some lowered their heads, Others stared at the floor. The prosecution didn't rely on video. They didn't have a murder weapon. They didn't have bruises or marks. What they had was sound. And in that courtroom, sound was enough to shake everyone. But was it enough to convict? The defense countered with their own breakdown. They argued that Warriena was unstable that night, that her behavior was aggressive, even violent, that Tostee had done what many would do, protect himself by creating space. He didn't force her over the edge, they said. He locked her outside. She chose to climb. A tragic choice, a panicked one, but hers. And they reminded the jury, guilt must be proven beyond reasonable doubt. Intent must be clear. There was no proof he touched her, no video showing him pushing, no direct evidence that he wanted her to fall. Only words, tone, a haunting quiet. As the trial progressed, witnesses were called. A neighbor on the 12th floor recounted what he saw. Her legs, hanging. The scream, then the fall. Another neighbor said he heard banging, furniture scraping, then a woman's voice shouting, desperate. Forensic experts analyzed the balcony. They estimated the height, the grip strength needed to climb down. They described the near impossibility of surviving such a fall. But they couldn't prove how or why she went over. The jury was given instructions. They deliberated for days. The audio was replayed, the timeline reviewed. Everything hinged on one decision. Was this murder or a tragic accident? Days turned into weeks. The jury had been deliberating for hours. The courtroom was tense. Every inch of air felt heavy with anticipation. The evidence had been presented. The prosecution had their audio. Raw, chilling, with no clear resolution. The defense had their doubts, their alternative explanation. A woman who panicked, made a decision that led to tragedy. No one could say for certain what happened in those final moments. Finally, the day arrived. The judge walked into the courtroom. The jury, weary and torn, returned from their deliberation room. The courtroom grew silent. The foreman stood. He turned to the judge. The verdict was clear. Not guilty. A collective gasp echoed through the courtroom. The family of Warriena Wright remained seated. Some of them cried quietly. Some stared ahead in disbelief. The tension in the air was suffocating. Gable Tostee sat calmly at the defense table. His face gave nothing away. His posture didn't change. For him, it was over. The court battle had concluded, and he was free. But for many, this verdict didn't feel like justice. For some, it was a tragic accident. But for others, it was the end of a fight that never truly saw the light of day. News broke almost immediately. Media outlets in Australia and New Zealand began broadcasting the verdict. Social media exploded, filled with conflicting opinions. Many people couldn't reconcile the fact that someone could go through so much, so many heated moments, the recording, the coldness after the fall, and not be found guilty. Many asked, was there enough evidence? Others felt sympathy for Tostee, believing his actions were a result of panic, of a chaotic situation that spun out of control. They saw him as a man who made a bad decision, but didn't intend to harm. But for others, it was a bitter pill to swallow. To them, the evidence of guilt was too clear. The threats, the silence afterward, the recording that seemed to tell a story of manipulation, control, and detachment. They saw a man who should have been held accountable for his actions. Once the jury reached its verdict, the media spotlight shifted from the courtroom to Gable Tostee himself. He had been in the news before, but now the attention on him was unparalleled. In the months following the trial, Tostee began granting interviews. His first major public appearance was on the program 60 Minutes. In this interview, he appeared composed, calm, and almost detached from the emotional weight of the case. He spoke about what happened that night, or at least what he claimed happened. He repeated his version of events, explaining that Warriena had been unstable, that he had done everything he could to avoid conflict. He said he was as surprised as anyone by her fall, and that he had nothing to do with it. But the tone in which he spoke disturbed some. He didn't seem remorseful. He didn't seem to feel the gravity of the situation the way many expected him to. Instead, his demeanor was that of a man who had survived a storm, but now that it was over, he wasn't emotionally tied to the wreckage. Viewers were divided. Some saw a man telling his side of the story, defending himself against accusations. Others saw someone who had no true emotional understanding of the damage he had caused. As Tostee appeared more in the media, the controversy only deepened. On one side, people believed he had been unfairly treated, misunderstood. On the other, many saw him as someone who escaped justice, someone who used the system to avoid accountability. The case sparked larger conversations about dating in the digital age. Tinder, the app where Gable Tostee and Warriena met, found itself at the center of debates on the dangers of online dating and the risks that strangers pose to one another. News outlets were quick to bring attention to the fact that the recording was made without Warriena's knowledge. The idea of privacy violations and trust in online relationships took on a new meaning. The case also brought up questions about the definition of reckless behavior. How far should someone be held accountable for creating a situation that leads to another person's death, even if it wasn't directly intentional? In the years following the trial, social media continued to be a battleground. People argued, they debated, they shared their own experiences of online dating, of encounters with strangers. Some used the case as a cautionary tale, warning others about the dangers of meeting someone new. Others expressed their frustrations with a system that seemed to prioritize legal technicalities over moral clarity. Meanwhile, the public's perception of Gable Tostee remained a complicated one. Some felt he was a victim of circumstance, someone who had been swept up in an impossible situation. Others couldn't shake the image of the man who seemed completely unfazed by the tragedy, who calmly walked away from the scene and continued on with his life. In the aftermath, Warriena's family quietly returned to New Zealand. They avoided the media, though their grief was palpable. The trial had been their opportunity to seek justice for their daughter. The verdict, however, didn't bring closure. They would forever have to live with the loss of a young woman who had so much potential, so much life ahead of her. The tragedy didn't just take Warriena away from her family, it also robbed the world of her voice, her advocacy for animal rights, her laughter, and her light. As the years passed, the case continued to reverberate in public consciousness. Some felt it was a lesson in vulnerability, in the fragility of life, and the complexity of human relationships. Others simply couldn't move past the haunting thought that someone's fate could be decided by the sheer weight of fear. Fear, built by words. Fear, built by manipulation. Was it murder? Was it an accident? Was it something far darker? Something that we can never fully understand? Even now, the answers remain elusive. And for many, that is the most unsettling part of all.